At this point, it's pretty hard to ignore the irony of Drake's situation. When you label yourself a rapper, just drop a whole new album, and go on an extensive tour, yet the focus keeps shifting to the lawsuit you're tangled up in. It's a bit much. It's honestly frustrating that someone who was once considered one of the biggest stars in rap now has their brand defined more by legal issues than their music. Despite all of this, Drake is still doubling down on his lawsuit against his label and Not Like Us, but even more reports are surfacing about what's going on behind the scenes, and it's getting uglier by the day. Earlier this week, Drake and his team tried to spin the narrative that they had come out on top in their legal battle with iHeartMedia, who was named in the initial lawsuit. They claimed to have reached a settlement, leading his fans and those covering his image to celebrate, acting like they had secured a major victory. Drake even joked about it in the most cringeworthy way imaginable. The problem here is that what Drake was saying wasn't just an exaggeration, it was a straight-up lie. And as more details come to light, the claims about what's really happening behind the scenes have never looked more inaccurate. Before we dive deeper into just how much this is all unraveling for Drake, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps out a lot. This is one of the most pivotal moments in hip-hop this year, and your support means the world. Now, as for Drake, right now, his music is barely even part of the conversation. Instead, it feels like he's investing all his energy into whatever he stands to gain from the multiple lawsuits he's filed against his label and anyone else connected to Not Like Us. It seems like Drake and his team have stepped up their efforts more than they did when the first major lawsuit was filed, pushing hard to stir up as much drama as possible. At the same time, they are trying to craft a narrative for the public, one where it looks like they are winning, and the truth is firmly on their side. This narrative took shape when news broke that Drake and iHeartMedia, who's also been in the crosshairs of his lawsuits alongside his label, supposedly reached some kind of settlement agreement. With that information out, Drake's fans and the media that backs him started running with the idea that they had defeated iHeart, portraying them as being in the wrong and Drake as the victim who had triumphed. Drake even took to social media to poke fun at the situation in ways that felt incredibly tone-deaf. But here's the thing. This wasn't a victory to begin with. The petition that was filed was just that, a petition, not a legal win. Soon after, more information surfaced from sources close to the OVO camp, claiming that Drake had received a large sum in the settlement, which supposedly proved that iHeartMedia was in the wrong and that Drake's claims were valid. Fans and followers of OVO eagerly latched onto this narrative, acting as though the silence from others was a result of them not wanting to admit Drake had come out on top. But in reality, there was no real substance behind what was being claimed. The tide has since turned. Multiple news outlets, including Charlemagne from iHeartMedia and his colleagues, have begun to share their version of events. Of course, you'd have to consider their bias, given Charlemagne's association with iHeart, but they weren't the only ones speaking up. Journalists with direct knowledge of the situation have also stepped forward, revealing what's really been happening behind the scenes. As more stories emerged, it became clear that the narrative OVO was pushing, that Drake was controlling the industry and winning his legal battles, was far from the truth. In fact, it's now evident that Drake has been caught in one of his biggest lies yet. He didn't win anything. Based on the information from Charlemagne, the initial reports, and various journalists, it seems the true story is that after iHeart engaged with Drake regarding the petition he filed, they provided him with the information he asked for. However, Drake didn't find what he was hoping for, which we'll dive into shortly. The reality here is that Drake's claims were inaccurate. He didn't receive any major payout or reward, as both he and his fans at OVO had suggested. Essentially, what happened was that iHeart gave Drake the info he was seeking, but when it became clear there was nothing supporting his claims, both sides agreed to drop the issue and move on. In the bigger picture, this situation demonstrates that Drake's allegations couldn't be proven by either Spotify or iHeart. This shows us that, when it comes to the major players who help bring music to the masses, there's nothing manufactured about the success of Not Like Us. For Drake, it's becoming more and more clear that the song's impact is legitimate. He'll have to come to terms with this sooner or later. So, after Drake walked away from this petition with little to show for it, and with so much still unclear about what's really been going on, It makes sense why his team tried to frame this as a win before we knew the full story. They were probably hoping to shape public perception, making it seem like Drake was revealing some hidden truth about the music industry. Even if they weren't in the right, pushing the narrative that Drake was accomplishing something meaningful might have changed how people viewed the situation. But as we've now learned, that narrative just isn't true. Ultimately, Drake ended up right where he started, with no solid proof from iHeart that anything shady had been going on behind the scenes to push Not Like Us into becoming one of the biggest hits we've seen in recent memory. Looking at how this situation unfolded, it's clear that when Drake and iHeart sat down to discuss how songs are promoted in ways that go against industry norms, which is what Drake was implying happened with Not Like Us, iHeart likely reminded him that, throughout his own career, his records have been promoted in similar ways and undoubtedly benefited from those very practices that is now criticizing. In fact, if we think back to some of Drake's earlier hits, many of those tracks were heavily pushed, and it was obvious that they weren't resonating culturally the way they should have. But the industry worked to make them seem like major successes. It's possible that Drake has realized now that if he continues down this path, exploring these claims could backfire. It could open the door for a closer examination of his legacy and reputation, which could lead to more questions about how much he himself has benefited from the industry tactics he's now denouncing. If this ever came to light, people would look back at Drake's time at the top and start questioning everything he did, seeing it as a fabricated success rather than the truth. At this point, if people start forgetting when Drake was actually at his best, things will reach a point where he's in a position he can't come back from. It could destroy him in ways we never could have anticipated. With all that's happening right now, it's clear that Drake's path of denial and deceit is leading him into a much worse place than any of us could have imagined. The OVO rapper and everything he once stood for are changing, and not for the better. Unfortunately, it's unfolding in the worst possible way. As this whole situation continues, it's becoming more evident that Drake's attempt to spin this as a win just fell apart because the truth is, he was lying. In an effort to double down, Drake sent out another 26-page update in his lawsuit against his label, reiterating everything he'd previously said. But once again, he's trying to twist aspects of what happened with iHeart, who he just settled with, to give himself another shot at proving a point. But that angle deserves its own video, so be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more on that. With the case in Texas still ongoing and another one in New York, it's becoming clear that Drake is doing everything he can to drag this situation out and make it as difficult as possible for everyone involved. Looking at the latest update in his lawsuit, Drake is pulling from every direction, trying to make this a drawn-out process. It's becoming increasingly tedious and even pathetic to watch him grasp at straws to avoid acknowledging his loss in a rap beef that we all know he lost fair and square. It's a waiting game now, but it's already crystal clear that Drake and his team have been lying about what's going on and what they are trying to gain from this whole ordeal. As things progress, we'll only see more of it. But as far as the loss in the rap beef goes, it's reached a point where I've completely lost any remaining respect I had for Drake. Honestly, his legacy is tarnished beyond repair. I never thought we'd see a timeline like this where Drake's entire career would go down this path. Despite releasing new music and going on tour, his focus now seems to be solely on changing the narrative through these ridiculous legal documents. For a rapper at this stage in their career, we've never seen someone damage their reputation and legacy like this. While Drake might be proud of the moves he's making and think it's somehow going to benefit him, the reality is that his attempts are alienating everyone except his most loyal fans. Even within the documents, it's obvious that he has nothing to stand on right now, and is just trying to get back at people in the most petty way possible. The truth is, while Drake keeps pushing these lawsuits, in terms of actual music, the thing we all care about, Kendrick Lamar has pulled so far ahead that there's no way Drake will ever be able to recover from this. At least when it comes to all of this, Drake isn't just being exposed for how absurd his actions are and how damaging they're turning out to be for hip-hop. Between all his losses and the rise of Kendrick Lamar, Drake has never found himself in such a terrible position, in every sense possible. And as more information leaks about what Drake is really up to behind the scenes, it's clear things are only going to get worse for him from here. So, with all that in mind, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about the fact that Drake and his team's claims have now been proven false? And how do you feel about him doubling down on his actions while all of this is unfolding? I'm really looking forward to reading your take on this. If you've made it this far in the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. It helps out a lot. And if you want to see how Drake got embarrassed even further by being dissed at the Oscars, and how he and his team are really not handling it well, check out the suggested video.